The Krellian Empire ruled 47 systems with absolute power for 3,000 years. Their brutal fleets had never faced a real challenge until a single human ship appeared at their border. When Captain Reynolds gave them a 10-second ultimatum, the entire galactic order began to unravel. What happened when the most feared empire in history encountered a species that refused to bow? For 3,000 years, the Krellian Empire maintained absolute control across 47 star systems. Their expansion faced no meaningful resistance, their rule enforced by fleets designed to inspire terror before combat even began. These warships were massive angular constructs of dark metal, their surfaces covered with weapon emplacements and scarred hull plates from countless demonstrations of power. Each vessel served as both fortress and psychological weapon. Engineered to dominate visually long before engaging targets, Admiral Kor commanded from the bridge of the Crimson Death, a flagship whose crew had known only victory for generations. His officers conducted drills with mechanical precision, but had forgotten the taste of genuine uncertainty. Their tactical simulations assumed compliant opponents. Their war games built around predictable surrenders rather than actual combat scenarios. This institutional softness permeated every level of command, from junior gunners to senior strategists who hadn't faced a real threat in living memory. Krellian military doctrine centered on overwhelming displays of force, followed by psychological domination. Standard procedure involved deploying 3 times the necessary ships, activating all weapon systems simultaneously, and transmitting surrender demands across every frequency. Their approach assumed all species shared a basic self-preservation instinct that would override principles or courage. This belief formed the core of imperial strategy. The strong naturally dominate the weak, and resistance only delayed the inevitable. Border patrols had become ceremonial displays rather than defensive operations. Ships followed fixed routes, scanned empty sectors, and returned to base without incident. The crews focused more on maintaining appearance than combat readiness, their vigilance eroded by centuries without meaningful threats. The Empire's control mechanism relied on this perception of invincibility, a carefully cultivated image that prevented challenges before they could form. This entire system operated on one fundamental equation: demonstrated strength prevents conflict. The Krellians believed their technological advantage and ruthless reputation made actual fighting unnecessary. Their military infrastructure prioritized intimidation over innovation, tradition over adaptation. For 3 millennia, this philosophy proved effective against every species they encountered. That certainty was about to fracture. On the edge of Sector 7, a single sensor contact appeared where none should exist. The blip moved against standard stellar currents, its trajectory cutting across established shipping lanes. Watch officers initially dismissed it as sensor echo or cosmic interference, another anomaly in systems they controlled so completely they'd stopped truly watching them. The Krellian Empire was about to learn the difference between being the hunter and becoming the hunted. Their assumptions about strength, their beliefs about dominance, their entire understanding of galactic power dynamics, all would be tested against something they had never encountered. A presence that didn't follow their rules, didn't respect their territory, and didn't fear their reputation was entering their space. The age of unchallenged predation was ending. Sensors aboard the Crimson Death registered an anomaly, traveling at velocities that breached known physics. The contact entered their scanning range without transition, appearing fully formed rather than accelerating into detection. Its energy signature displayed readings that didn't match any known propulsion system in Krellian databases, showing neither plasma exhaust nor reactor spikes characteristic of conventional drives. The emission pattern suggested controlled energy release without wasteful expenditure, a efficiency that contradicted every wartime engineering principle the Empire employed. Its movement pattern defied standard navigation protocols. The vessel moved with fluid, undulating motions more reminiscent of aquatic creatures than mechanical objects. It made constant minor course adjustments without apparent thrust vectors, its path resembling a continuous flow rather than discrete positional changes. Navigation officers struggled to plot intercept courses because the target didn't follow predictable ballistic trajectories. Each attempted projection quickly became obsolete as the contact shifted direction with impossible responsiveness. Pulsing blue energy rippled across the vessel's surface in organic waveforms. The light patterns traveled from bow to stern in rhythmic cycles that suggested breathing rather than mechanical operation. The hue differed from standard energy signatures, softer than weapons fire, deeper than navigation lights, with a quality that seemed to penetrate space rather than merely illuminate it. Scanners couldn't determine whether this represented shield technology, communication method, or something entirely outside Krellian understanding. Admiral Kor initially dismissed the contact as sensor malfunction. He ordered diagnostic checks and recalibration of all detection systems. The crew ran 3 separate verification protocols, each confirming the contact's physical reality while failing to classify its nature. Secondary vessels confirmed the sighting from different angles, their overlapping sensor data creating conflicting readings that only deepened the mystery. The object's continued presence gradually shifted from technical anomaly to tactical concern. Weapons officers attempted targeting solutions as standard procedure. Their systems failed to achieve lock despite multiple approaches. The contact's erratic movement pattern combined with its energy emissions created targeting interference that baffled tracking computers. Each time a solution nearly consolidated, the vessel would make a minute adjustment that forced complete recalculation. The targeting computers interpreted these movements as random, while human observers detected unsettling purpose in each evasion. The vessel's structural design challenged established spacecraft engineering. Its form followed curves rather than angles, with no visible weapon ports, communication arrays, or sensor dishes. The surface appeared seamless, lacking the panel lines, access ports, or external components standard on all known spacecraft. Its construction suggested either revolutionary manufacturing techniques or fundamentally different design philosophy prioritizing organic integration over modular construction, moved through the void with graceful assurance that seemed to comment on Krellian architectural brutality, where Imperial ships projected domination through angular menace and visible armaments. This vessel conveyed capability through elegant simplicity. Its very presence in contested space served as silent critique of thousands of years of military design tradition. Its fluid motions mocking the rigid formations of the Krellian armada. This marked humanity's first appearance in monitored space, though the Krellians didn't yet recognize it as such. The contact represented both technological demonstration and deliberate provocation, testing Imperial responses while showcasing capabilities beyond their understanding. Every aspect of the encounter, from detection evasion to targeting resistance, served as calibrated assessment of Krellian military readiness. The vessel positioned itself precisely where Imperial doctrine demanded response, forcing reactions that would reveal weaknesses and assumptions. The encounter represented final warning before consequences. The peaceful appearance concealed deliberate positioning for tactical advantage, the elegant movements masking combat readiness that would soon become apparent. The Krellians perceived mystery where they faced declaration, wondering at the anomaly's purpose while missing its function as both assessment and ultimatum. A voice broke Imperial communication silence on every frequency. It spoke flawless Krellian without accent or hesitation, its tone measured and calm despite the circumstances. The transmission carried no static, no compression artifacts, no indication of distance or relay points. It sounded as though the speaker stood beside each receiver, addressing them personally yet collectively across the entire fleet formation. This technical achievement alone should have alerted the Krellians to the capabilities they faced. Captain Reynolds identified himself as commander of Earth Vessel Defiance. He offered no titles, no honorifics, no elaborate introduction beyond basic identification. His voice remained neutral throughout the declaration, lacking the aggressive posturing or deliberate intimidation common in Krellian military communications. The absence of emotional emphasis made the message more unsettling than any threat could have been. He presented facts without decoration, allowing the content itself to carry weight. His message contained 7 words in translation: withdraw from this system within 10 seconds. The demand stood without qualification, explanation, or negotiation. He didn't reference Krellian sovereignty, didn't acknowledge their military presence as legitimate, didn't offer diplomatic alternatives. The statement treated their occupation as temporary condition requiring immediate correction. This approach contradicted all established protocols for first contact or territorial dispute within Imperial experience. Krellian bridge crews initially responded with disbelief and derision. Junior officers chuckled at the apparent absurdity of a single vessel threatening an entire battle group. Weapons technicians shook their heads while maintaining targeting systems, considering the transmission either malfunction or elaborate joke. The demand seemed so divorced from military reality that experienced personnel dismissed it as psychological warfare of the most amateurish variety. Their confidence in numerical superiority made the ultimatum appear genuinely delusional. Admiral Core remained silent at his command station. He observed the Defiance's continued position on the main viewer, noting how the vessel held perfect formation despite being surrounded by hostile forces. His tactical display showed 36 weapon systems locked on the target, yet the human ship displayed no defensive posturing, no evasive maneuvering, no indication it recognized the threat arrayed against it. This calm in the face of overwhelming force suggested either madness or capability beyond their understanding. The countdown began exactly as stated. A mechanical voice spoke numbers in the same flawless Krellian, each digit delivered with precise timing. 10. The word hung in the air of the bridge, its final consonant sharp and clear. 9. Weapons officers glanced toward command stations for firing orders. 8. Engineering teams reported full power to all systems. 7. Tactical displays showed no change in the Defiance's status. 6. The Admiral's hand hovered above the engagement console. 5. Junior officers stopped smiling. 4. The Defiance's blue energy patterns intensified slightly. 3. Targeting systems registered minor fluctuations. 2. The Admiral considered withdrawal options. 1. Every officer watched their screens. 0. Silence followed for exactly 1 second. Then the Defiance's energy signature changed dramatically, its blue glow shifting from gentle pulse to intense corona. The vessel's outline seemed to sharpen against the star field, its contours becoming more defined as power levels increased across unknown systems. It made no aggressive move yet, holding position while its energy output suggested weapons charging or shields activating. The transition from passive to active status occurred instantly, without visible preparation or gradual buildup. The ultimatum period had served multiple purposes beyond the obvious demand. It allowed human systems to complete full scan of Krellian vessels, identifying weaknesses, command structures, and reactor signatures. It forced the Empire to reveal their tactical readiness through weapon activation and targeting patterns. Most importantly, it established the terms of engagement clearly and without ambiguity. The Defiance would now respond based on the choice the Krellians had made through inaction. Captain Reynolds had followed standard human engagement protocol for first contact with aggressive forces. The warning stood as both legal requirement and moral obligation under interstellar law. Their response would now follow established rules of engagement designed to minimize loss of life while achieving tactical objectives. The Krellians had chosen the path of resistance, and the Defiance would answer accordingly. Admiral Core gave the order to engage. His voice carried the weight of 3,000 years of imperial certainty, the assumption that overwhelming force always produced submission. The command traveled through hardened communication channels to 36 capital ships arranged in standard attack formation. Each vessel represented the pinnacle of Krellian military engineering, their designs refined through centuries of uncontested dominance. Weapons officers activated firing sequences they had practiced countless times in drills against theoretical opponents. The Krellian armada unleashed its full arsenal in coordinated volleys. Energy beams carved across the void in precise intersecting patterns designed to overwhelm any known shielding system. Plasma torpedoes launched in waves, their containment fields glowing with contained stellar temperatures. Kinetic projectiles accelerated to fractions of light speed, their trajectories calculated to strike simultaneously from multiple vectors. The space between forces became a killing zone of concentrated destructive power, every cubic meter filled with weaponized energy, capable of vaporizing asteroids. The Defiance made no evasive maneuvers as the barrage approached. It held position relative to the Krellian formation, its orientation unchanged from the moment of first contact. External cameras showed no visible reaction to the incoming fire, no defensive positioning, no emergency power transfers. The vessel maintained the same calm configuration it had displayed during the ultimatum period, its smooth hull reflecting the incoming energy weapons without apparent effect. This passive response contradicted every combat protocol in known space. A blue energy barrier shimmered into existence milliseconds before impact. The shield manifested as a seamless sphere around the human vessel, its surface appearing like disturbed water rather than solid barrier. The light emanating from it carried a quality that seemed to absorb rather than reflect, creating visual distortions at the boundary between normal space and protected volume. The shield's activation required no visible power source or emitter arrays, appearing as natural extension of the vessel's organic design principles. Krellian weapons dissolved against the barrier without visible effect. Energy beams struck the blue surface and spread across it like water hitting glass, their destructive potential dissipating into harmless light patterns. Plasma torpedoes detonated against the shield in spectacular eruptions that failed to transfer energy to the protected vessel. Kinetic projectiles vaporized upon contact, their mass converted to brief flashes of light that left no mark on the defensive field. Each attack method, developed over millennia to defeat every known protection system, proved completely ineffective. Weapons officers reported zero damage to the target across all monitoring systems. Thermal sensors showed no temperature increase on the Defiance's hull. Radiation detectors registered no leakage through the shield. Structural integrity scanners could not penetrate the energy barrier to assess potential damage. The only measurable effect was minor energy dissipation across the shield's surface, a phenomenon that appeared more like controlled absorption than defensive strain. Tactical computers began issuing error messages as their damage assessment algorithms received impossible input data. The Defiance hadn't even activated its own weapon systems yet. External sensors detected no energy buildup in offensive arrays, no targeting systems aligning, no missile ports opening. The vessel continued to operate in purely defensive mode, its capabilities remaining largely concealed despite the massive attack directed against it. This passive defense demonstrated technological superiority, so profound that the Krellian assault seemed almost ceremonial in its ineffectiveness. The human ship could withstand their full firepower without employing any of its own combat systems. Krellian commanders watched their main viewers in disbelief. Senior officers reviewed the same sensor data from multiple angles, seeking explanations for the impossible results. Tactical displays that should have shown target destruction instead showed perfect defensive performance. Communication channels filled with confused reports from ship captains who had never experienced weapons failure on this scale. The certainty that had underpinned imperial military doctrine for centuries began crumbling in real time as officers witnessed their most powerful attacks achieving nothing. Their entire understanding of space combat evaporated in those seconds. The principles of overwhelming force, technological superiority, and psychological domination, concepts that had governed Krellian strategy for generations, proved completely irrelevant against this opponent. The encounter demonstrated that their weapons technology, battle tactics, and even their fundamental understanding of physics might be obsolete. The Defiance's defense wasn't just better technology. It represented different physics, different engineering principles, a different approach to conflict that rendered their entire military tradition meaningless. The Defiance returned fire with perfect precision. Blue energy beams lanced outward in multiple directions simultaneously, each finding specific systems aboard Krellian vessels. The targeting demonstrated computational capability beyond anything in Imperial databases, with beams adjusting trajectory mid-flight to strike components hidden behind armor plating. Each shot showed understanding of Krellian engineering principles, hitting critical junctions without causing secondary damage to surrounding systems. The beams carried energy signatures that disrupted technology, without creating explosive decompression or catastrophic failures. Engines shut down across the entire armada, without a single explosion. Main thrusters went dormant as power conduits experienced controlled shutdown sequences. Maneuvering thrusters ceased operation in perfect synchronization, leaving ships drifting without propulsion. The shutdown process resembled emergency safety protocols rather than combat damage, with systems entering standby mode instead of suffering destruction. Engineering teams reported all propulsion systems offline but intact, their components undamaged despite the energy weapons that had struck them. Weapon systems went offline simultaneously on 36 warships. Energy capacitors drained and controlled discharges that prevented accidental detonation. Weapon mounts locked in safe positions with targeting systems purged from memory. The disablement occurred so rapidly that few crews realized they'd lost combat capability until they attempted to fire secondary volleys. Each vessel became effectively disarmed while maintaining structural integrity and internal power distribution. The precision suggested the Defiance had mapped their entire weapons architecture during the initial engagement. Life support and communications remained fully operational throughout the disablement process. Environmental systems continued recycling air and managing temperature without interruption. Internal lighting and power distribution suffered no disruptions across any vessel. Communication arrays stayed active, allowing ship-to-ship coordination even as combat capabilities vanished. This selective targeting demonstrated ability to distinguish between lethal and essential systems, a discrimination Imperial weapons technology had never achieved. The entire engagement lasted 27 seconds from first shot to complete neutralization. By the time bridge crews processed what had happened, their vessels had become combat ineffective. Status reports flooded command channels indicating identical conditions. Across the fleet, mobile weapons platforms transformed into drifting habitats with full life support but zero offensive or defensive capability. The speed of the operation prevented any coordinated response or emergency protocols from being implemented. 36 warships became inert shells, drifting in relative formation. Their weapon ports stood empty, their engines cold, their tactical systems offline. Only navigation lights and internal systems remained active, creating the eerie appearance of functional vessels that had simply ceased being warships. The transformation from battle-ready armada to disarmed fleet occurred so completely that external observers might have mistaken it for coordinated drill rather than combat action. Not a single Krellian life was lost during the operation. Medical bays reported no casualties, engineering no injuries, and command decks no fatalities. The Defiance's weapons had disabled technology while preserving organic life with surgical precision. This outcome contradicted every Imperial engagement protocol, which prioritized target destruction over preservation of enemy personnel. The human approach demonstrated capability to win conflicts without taking lives, a concept foreign to Krellian military doctrine. The Defiance announced its intention to board for questioning. The same calm voice returned to all communication channels, stating that inspection teams would visit each vessel to gather information. The announcement carried no threat, only straightforward declaration of intent. It treated the disarmed warships as sources of information rather than captured prizes, focusing on intelligence gathering rather than conquest or humiliation. Admiral Kor understood the implications immediately. The precision disabling of his fleet, the preservation of all life, the selective targeting, these demonstrated not just technological superiority, but different ethical framework. The humans could have destroyed his entire command with less effort than they spent disabling it. Their choice to preserve life while achieving military objectives revealed morality that valued existence over domination, protection over destruction. This realization shook his understanding of power more profoundly than the technological demonstration had. Captain Reynolds conducted the interrogation personally aboard the Defiance. The setting contrasted sharply with Krellian interrogation chambers. No restraints, no visible monitoring equipment, no intimidation displays. They sat at a simple table in a well-lit room with neutral temperature and atmospheric conditions. Reynolds maintained the same calm demeanor he'd displayed during the ultimatum, his questions delivered in measured tones without accusation or aggression. The environment suggested information gathering rather than punishment or coercion. He methodically extracted details about Krellian governance structures. His questions focused on administrative systems, resource allocation methods, and population management techniques. He sought specifics about command hierarchies, communication networks, and logistical support structures that maintained Imperial control. The Admiral initially provided only basic information, following standard resistance protocols for captive officers. Reynolds responded by demonstrating exhaustive knowledge of Krellian military protocols, making continued resistance appear pointless through precise references to regulations and procedures. The Empire controlled 40 billion beings across multiple slave worlds. These populations served as labor resources for mineral extraction, agricultural production, and manufacturing operations. Their planetary environments ranged from habitable zones to harsh frontier worlds with minimal life support infrastructure. Control mechanisms varied from direct military occupation to puppet governments enforcing imperial directives. The scale of operation required sophisticated management systems to track population distribution, work assignments, and resource output across light years of territory. These populations existed without basic rights or representation. They couldn't choose work assignments, relocate between facilities, or petition for improved conditions. Movement required permits issued by imperial overseers, with unauthorized travel punishable by immediate termination. No representative bodies existed to voice concerns or negotiate terms. Communication between subject groups remained strictly controlled to prevent organization or collective action. The system designed isolation into its fundamental structure, keeping populations divided and manageable. Labor was compelled through constant threat of violence and institutional punishment. Overseers carried authorization for on-site executions without review. Penalties included reduced rations, corporal punishment, and transfer to hazardous work details. Family separation served as standard disciplinary measure, with relatives held as leverage for compliance. The threat structure extended across generations, with children inheriting parents' labor obligations from birth. Compliance ensured survival rather than offering improvement in conditions or status. Reynolds connected these facts to historical patterns of human oppression. He referenced Earth's experiences with institutional slavery, indentured servitude, and forced labor systems. His analysis identified common control mechanisms across species and cultures: the manipulation of fear, the restriction of movement, the destruction of family structures. He noted how each system claimed economic necessity while serving power consolidation purposes. The parallel suggested universal patterns in oppression that transcended biological or cultural differences. He identified the system by its proper terminology: institutionalized slavery. The designation carried specific legal definitions under interstellar conventions that even the Krellians nominally recognized. Reynolds detailed how the Empire's practices violated multiple articles of galactic charters they had signed without intention of honoring. His breakdown showed systematic violation of basic rights that even many predatory species considered beyond acceptable exploitation. The classification shifted the discussion from political disagreement to criminal wrongdoing. The Admiral defended the system as natural order of strong over weak. He cited Krellian philosophy that considered domination the proper expression of advanced civilization. His arguments framed control as necessary for galactic stability and resource management. He claimed subject species lacked capacity for self-governance and required direction from superior intellects. The justification followed patterns Reynolds had documented in historical human oppressors: the conflation of power with virtue, the dismissal of other beings' capabilities, the self-serving definition of civilization. Reynolds calmly explained how this violated fundamental human principles. He outlined the core beliefs that guided human expansion: the right to self-determination, the prohibition against ownership of beings, the requirement for consent in governance. His tone remained educational rather than confrontational, presenting human values as non-negotiable foundations rather than debatable preferences. He made clear these principles would guide human actions regardless of Krellian understanding or acceptance. The interrogation ended with Reynolds promising to report findings to Earth Command. He stated the information would receive immediate attention at the highest levels of human governance. The Admiral remained in protective custody as the Defiance prepared its transmission. Reynolds' final statement indicated the matter now moved beyond military engagement to political and ethical consideration. The encounter had transitioned from border incident to systemic crisis requiring strategic response. Earth Command received Reynolds' encrypted briefing detailing 40 billion enslaved beings. The transmission included sensor data, interrogation transcripts, and population distribution charts across 47 systems. Analysts verified the information through multiple intelligence channels, confirming the scale and severity of the situation. The report highlighted systematic violations of interstellar conventions that humanity had helped establish centuries earlier. Command staff processed the data with growing recognition of the ethical and strategic implications. Diplomats, generals, and political leaders gathered in emergency session within hours. The assembly represented every branch of human governance with authority to commit resources to interstellar operations. They convened in a secure briefing room with direct links to military commands and intelligence services. The atmosphere carried tension normally reserved for existential threats to Earth itself, with participants understanding the decision would define human presence in the galaxy for generations. Each representative brought different priorities and perspectives to the discussion. They faced an impossible decision with consequences spanning light years. Intervention required committing forces across unknown territory against entrenched opposition. Non-intervention meant accepting continued suffering on a scale humanity had fought to eliminate from its own history. The choice represented a fundamental test of whether human principles applied only to their own species or extended to others regardless of distance or difference. Both options carried risks that could reshape the balance of power in explored space. Intervention risked triggering simultaneous conflicts across three separate fronts. Intelligence indicated Krellian forces maintained significant reserves in core systems beyond the initial engagement zone. Their military infrastructure included planetary defenses, reserve fleets, and rapid response units that hadn't yet been activated. Human forces would need to operate across vast distances with extended supply lines and limited intelligence about secondary threats. The operation could easily expand beyond initial projections into full-scale war against an empire with 3,000 years of resources in action meant condemning billions to continued oppression without hope of relief. The briefing detailed conditions that included forced labor, family separation, and systematic deprivation of basic rights. Historical analysis showed such systems rarely ended without external intervention, often continuing for centuries through institutional inertia and controlled population growth. Human refusal to act would effectively endorse the status quo through passive acceptance, setting precedent for future encounters with similar situations. The moral burden would remain even if the practical consequences seemed distant. Military assessments showed Krellian forces remained formidable despite the Defiance's victory. Their total fleet strength numbered in the thousands of vessels across 47 systems. While human technology demonstrated superiority in the initial engagement, scaling that advantage across multiple battlefields presented different challenges. Logistics, intelligence gathering, and force distribution became critical factors that could neutralize technological edges. The assessment concluded that victory remained possible but far from certain. With high probability of significant losses, humanity's technological advantage might not scale effectively across multiple systems. The Defiance represented cutting-edge technology that hadn't yet been deployed in large numbers. Production capacity for similar vessels remained limited, with most current ships serving defensive roles nearer Earth. Adapting the technology for widespread deployment required time and resources not immediately available. The Council had to consider whether they could field sufficient forces to achieve objectives without overextending their capabilities. The Council debated for hours, weighing moral imperative against practical risk. Military leaders emphasized the strategic dangers of extended campaigns across unknown territory. Diplomats warned of political consequences with other galactic powers who might perceive intervention as expansionism. Ethical advisors stressed the fundamental principles that defined human civilization. Economic analysts projected resource costs that could strain Earth's economy for decades. Each perspective contributed to understanding the complete scope of the decision. One statement crystallized the stakes during the final hours of debate. A senior advisor noted that 40 billion beings needed protection that seemed mathematically impossible to provide. The number represented more lives than humanity had lost in all its wars combined, concentrated under systematic control that required equally systematic response. The scale of suffering demanded action beyond conventional risk assessment, beyond careful calculation of advantages and disadvantages. The need itself became the primary factor in the decision matrix. Earth would have to gamble its security on principle rather than calculation. The choice represented a departure from standard strategic planning that prioritized home system defense above all other considerations. It required accepting potential vulnerability to protect beings who had no connection to humanity beyond shared consciousness. The decision framework shifted from what was safe to what was right, from what could be assured to what must be attempted. The Council moved toward commitment that defied military logic, but affirmed core human values. Human intelligence operations uncovered the Krellians' ultimate deterrent system through intercepted communications and deep space monitoring. Surveillance teams detected anomalous energy signatures across multiple subject worlds that didn't match standard industrial or military outputs. Pattern analysis revealed coordinated installations hidden beneath planetary surfaces and within orbital infrastructure. The discovery came through cross-referencing Imperial construction records with energy emission databases, creating a map of concealed facilities. Hidden weapons were buried across all 47 subject worlds in carefully coordinated patterns. Fusion bombs occupied deep geological strata near population centers, their placement designed to maximize tectonic instability upon detonation. Biological agent stockpiles rested in secured laboratories beneath administrative complexes, ready for atmospheric dispersal through venting systems. Orbital platforms masqueraded as communication satellites, while carrying planet-killer payloads capable of surface sterilization. Each installation maintained autonomous operation capabilities with deadman switches, triggering upon loss of Imperial control. Fusion bombs formed the primary destructive element of the network. These devices utilized compact stellar core technology that could destabilize planetary mantles upon activation. Biological agents included engineered pathogens targeting specific species across the slave populations, designed for rapid transmission and high mortality rates. Orbital platforms carried kinetic impactors and energy projectors capable of rendering atmospheres unbreathable through chemical alteration. The three systems worked in concert to ensure complete eradication through multiple redundant methods. Emperor Vaxon transmitted his threat through secure channels to human listening posts. His message detailed the deterrent system's capabilities and activation protocols. He stated explicitly that any liberation attempt would trigger immediate genocide across all subject worlds. The communication included sensor data showing weapons readiness and targeting parameters. Vaxon's tone carried absolute certainty that the threat would prevent intervention. His confidence built on 3 millennia of successful coercion through extreme measures. The protocol could annihilate 40 billion lives to preserve imperial rule through calculated sacrifice. Activation involved simultaneous detonation across all systems, creating a wave of destruction that would erase all evidence of Krellian occupation along with the occupied populations. The strategy treated subject beings as disposable assets rather than living creatures, their existence valuable only as leverage against external threats. This approach reflected the Empire's fundamental philosophy that control justified any action, however horrific. Simulations showed simultaneous neutralization was mathematically impossible, given current human capabilities. Analysis indicated the weapon systems were too numerous, too widely distributed, and too well protected for coordinated disablement. Time delay mechanisms required near instantaneous action across light years of space. The margin for error approached zero, with any failure resulting in catastrophic loss of life. Military planners calculated that even with perfect execution, the operation likely would exceed acceptable risk parameters. Outer colonies began going dark, in what intelligence operatives termed the Great Silence. Monitoring stations lost contact with 17 frontier outposts within a 48-hour period. The blackouts followed no discernible pattern, affecting systems with different technologies and populations. Sensor probes sent to investigate returned corrupted data or failed entirely. The phenomenon suggested coordinated action by forces with capabilities beyond Krellian technology, indicating possible third-party involvement in the conflict zone. This development implied unknown threats beyond Krellian space might be activating in response to the shifting power balance. Analysis indicated the disappearance pattern didn't match Krellian operational methods or known hostile species. The precision and scale suggested either previously undetected regional power or extragalactic intervention. The timing coincided exactly with human consideration of intervention, creating suspicion of coordinated response to potential instability. Earth Command now faced existential risk rather than mere military conflict. The combination of guaranteed genocide upon intervention and potential unknown threats changing the strategic landscape created unacceptable danger levels. Planners recognized that action could trigger chain reactions beyond their control or understanding. The stakes escalated from ethical imperative to survival calculus, where wrong decisions might endanger humanity itself, along with the populations they sought to protect. The calculus of intervention shifted from difficult to nearly unthinkable under these new parameters. Command staff reconsidered every aspect of their planned response, weighing certainty of massive loss of life against uncertainty of additional threats. The moral imperative remained clear, but the practical execution now seemed beyond current capabilities. They faced choosing between allowing continued slavery or risking galactic-scale destruction that might include human worlds. Admiral Cross and Captain Reynolds designed a desperate plan against impossible odds. They worked from a secure briefing room aboard the Defiance, surrounded by tactical displays showing the full scale of the Krellian threat. Their strategy needed to address two simultaneous problems: defeating a massive fleet while neutralizing hidden planetary weapons. Every conventional military principle argued against the operation's feasibility, requiring them to discard standard doctrine and create entirely new approaches to interstellar combat. 150 human ships would engage 10,000 Krellian vessels across multiple systems. The numerical disadvantage represented the largest force disparity in human military history. Previous engagements had never exceeded 3-to-1 odds, even in defensive actions. This operation required attacking across 47 systems with forces that should have been barely sufficient for a single system defense. The math suggested certain defeat before accounting for the additional complication of the doomsday weapons. The operation required simultaneous precision strikes across 47 systems with perfect timing. Each human task force needed to arrive at their assigned system within a 30-second window to prevent coordinated Krellian response. Attack sequences had to begin at identical moments despite light-minute communication delays between battle groups. The synchronization demanded navigation precision beyond previous operational parameters, with margin for error measured in milliseconds rather than minutes. Their strategy exploited Krellian weaknesses in coordination and command structure. Intelligence indicated Imperial forces relied on centralized control that created single points of failure. Removing command vessels would disrupt entire battle groups, while simultaneous attacks across multiple systems would overwhelm their capacity for strategic response. The plan targeted their operational rigidity, rather than trying to match their numerical superiority directly. Human ships would use three-dimensional weaving patterns to confuse traditional formations. This involved constant positional shifting that prevented fixed targeting solutions. Vessels would move in overlapping patterns that created temporary defensive screens, while maintaining offensive capability. The approach abandoned standard fleet formations for fluid dynamics that matched the Defiance's earlier solo performance against multiple opponents. Special teams would neutralize doomsday weapons during the main engagement. These units would deploy via stealth insertion during the combat phase, using the confusion of battle to access secured facilities. Each team carried specialized equipment for disarming different weapon types, from fusion bombs to biological agents. Their operations required perfect timing with the space engagement, as early detection would trigger the very destruction they sought to prevent. The plan risked total annihilation of human forces if any element failed. A single missed timing, one failed insertion, or unexpected Krellian adaptation could cascade into complete operational collapse. The complexity created multiple critical points where small errors would produce catastrophic results. Planners calculated survival probabilities that hovered near statistical zero under realistic combat conditions. Cross acknowledged the right choice wasn't the safe choice in this scenario. He stated clearly that conventional wisdom demanded they protect Earth rather than risk everything for unknown beings. His assessment noted that every strategic principle argued against the operation, but ethical imperative required proceeding despite the dangers. This position reflected the fundamental difference between human and Krellian values that had started the conflict. Every crew member understood they might not return from this mission. Briefings included explicit statements about survival probabilities and operational risks. Volunteers were accepted only after full disclosure of the likely outcomes. The force comprised personnel who chose to participate despite knowing the probable cost. Their commitment based on principle rather than expectation of success or survival. Humanity would gamble its future on freeing others rather than protecting itself. The operation represented the largest strategic risk in human history, committing their entire mobile fleet to an offensive action with minimal defensive reserves. Success would require perfect execution across multiple complex operations, while failure could leave Earth vulnerable to counterattack from both known and unknown threats. The decision prioritized moral obligation over tactical security, choosing possible extinction over certain complicity. Human ships abandoned traditional battle lines the moment they entered engagement range. They broke formation into individual elements that moved with independent purpose yet coordinated intention. Each vessel operated as both autonomous unit and part of collective whole, their positions shifting constantly relative to both enemy and ally. This fluid dynamic positioning created patterns that evolved too rapidly for fixed tactical responses. The approach emphasized adaptation over formation, responsiveness over rigidity. Vessels moved in complex patterns that defied Krellian tactical databases. Their trajectories followed non-repeating sequences that combined lateral drifts with sudden accelerations. Ships would cross paths at precise intervals, creating temporary defensive screens before dispersing again. The movement algorithms incorporated elements of swarm behavior, fluid dynamics, and quantum probability models. Krellian targeting computers attempted pattern recognition, but found no consistent predictive models. The formation resembled a three-dimensional net rather than a solid wall. Ships occupied positions that created overlapping fields of fire without presenting concentrated targets. Gaps appeared and closed throughout the formation, tempting attacks that would expose aggressors to crossfire. The network configuration allowed rapid reinforcement of threatened sectors while maintaining pressure across multiple points. This distributed structure prevented the Krellians from identifying primary targets or command vessels. Krellian hammer formations broke against this adaptive defense. Their standard attack pattern involved concentrated force applied against a single point in enemy lines. Human vessels simply flowed around these thrusts, allowing them to penetrate empty space before enveloping them from multiple angles. The hammerhead would find itself surrounded by shifting opponents who refused to maintain fixed positions for trading blows. Imperial commanders watched their most reliable formation dissolve against constant motion. Human targeting systems focused on disabling rather than destroying. Energy beams struck specific systems with surgical precision across the Krellian fleet. Engines received carefully calibrated pulses that shut down propulsion without causing containment breaches. Weapons arrays suffered targeted strikes that disabled firing mechanisms while leaving power systems intact. Communications arrays experienced frequency-specific interference that blocked transmissions without damaging hardware. Each shot demonstrated understanding of Krellian engineering and respect for life. Energy beams precisely hit engines, weapons, and communications arrays in that order. The sequence ensured vessels lost mobility first, then offensive capability, finally command coordination. This systematic approach neutralized threats while preserving maximum possible infrastructure and life. The targeting showed capacity to distinguish between combat systems and essential functions, striking only what was necessary to achieve military objectives. The precision required real-time analysis of thousands of enemy vessels simultaneously. Krellian commanders couldn't predict human movement patterns. Their tactical displays showed constantly shifting formations that offered no stable reference points. Attempts to establish firing solutions became obsolete within seconds as targets moved to new positions. Command decisions based on outdated information resulted in wasted attacks and vulnerable exposures. The uncertainty created hesitancy, where Imperial doctrine demanded decisive action. Their centralized command structure became a critical weakness. Ships waited for orders from flagship vessels that couldn't process the battle's rapidly changing conditions. The delay between observation, decision, and execution created vulnerabilities that human forces exploited immediately. Attempts to adapt through delegated authority resulted in confusion, as different ships received conflicting priorities. The system designed for controlled engagements failed against unpredictable opposition. Ships that should have supported each other instead created interference. Vessels attempting combined maneuvers found their firing lines blocked by allies responding to different tactical situations. Formation flying designed for coordinated attacks produced collisions and weapon interference when applied against fluid opponents. The Krellian numerical advantage became difficult to apply effectively as their own ships got in each other's way. Superior numbers became a liability against superior coordination. The larger Krellian force required more space to maneuver effectively, creating coordination challenges that human forces avoided through compact formation. Their additional vessels became obstacles rather than assets in the constantly shifting battle space. The Imperial advantage in firepower and durability meant little against opponents who refused to engage in direct exchanges, instead disabling systems with precise strikes from unpredictable angles. Liberation teams deployed across 47 worlds during the height of the space engagement. They arrived via stealth insertion craft that used the battle's energy signatures as cover for their approach. Each team consisted of specialists trained for specific environmental conditions and weapon systems. Their insertion points ranged from deep underground facilities to orbital stations, requiring different equipment and tactics for each location. The teams operated independently but followed synchronized timelines down to the second. Each team had specific coordinates for hidden weapon systems provided by intelligence operations. The data came from intercepted Imperial communications, infiltrated databases, and captured tactical plans. Targeting information included structural layouts, security system bypass codes, and emergency shutdown protocols. Teams carried portable scanners to verify locations and detect any changes made since intelligence gathering. The precision of their information determined the operation's success more than their combat skills. Fusion bombs were disarmed with nanotech precision instruments. Teams accessed the devices through maintenance shafts and secured tunnels. The disarming process involved injecting specialized nanites into control systems that rewrote detonation protocols. The microscopic machines physically altered circuitry to render firing mechanisms inoperable. Each device required approximately 7 minutes for complete neutralization once accessed. Teams worked in pairs with one handling disarmament, while the other maintained security. Biological agents were contained and neutralized in sealed facilities. These installations featured multiple airlock systems and negative pressure environments. Teams wore full containment suits with independent life support during operations. Neutralization involved introducing counteragents that broke down the pathogens at molecular levels. The process required careful monitoring to prevent accidental release during treatment. Completed facilities were sealed with permanent lockdown protocols to prevent future access. Orbital platforms were taken over through electronic warfare. Teams attached intrusion devices to external data ports that bypassed normal security. The systems ran algorithms that took control of weapon targeting and firing systems. Once accessed, the platforms were reprogrammed to recognize human command signals instead of Imperial codes. The process turned the destructive systems into defensive assets under new control. Each platform required approximately 12 minutes for complete conversion. The operation required perfect timing across multiple time zones and planetary rotations. Teams had to account for different day-night cycles, seasonal variations, and orbital positions. Coordination involved complex mathematical calculations to synchronize actions across light minutes of distance. Communication delays meant teams operated on preset schedules rather than real-time commands. Any deviation from the timetable risked alerting Imperial forces to the coordinated effort. Teams reported successful neutralization within minutes of each other. Status updates flashed across command channels in rapid sequence as each team completed their objectives. The reports followed a cascading pattern from the outermost systems inward toward the core worlds. Confirmation messages used encrypted burst transmissions that minimized detection risk. Each success added to the overall momentum of the operation. The entire Doomsday Protocol fell silent simultaneously across all 47 systems. Monitoring stations detected the coordinated shutdown through changed energy signatures and communication patterns. The weapons network ceased responding to Imperial command signals exactly as planned. Backup systems failed to activate due to the comprehensive nature of the neutralization. The silence represented the removal of the galaxy's largest coordinated threat. Emperor Vaxon lost his ultimate bargaining chip in one coordinated move. His command console showed every weapon system going offline within a 3-minute window. The sudden silence across the network indicated systematic disablement rather than random failures. His tactical advantage evaporated before he could issue any activation orders. The realization that his failsafe had been neutralized changed the strategic equation completely. Billions of lives were saved without their knowledge of the threat. The subject populations continued their daily routines unaware of the destruction that had been planned for them. Teams completed their missions without engaging local populations or revealing their presence. The operation prevented catastrophe, while maintaining operational secrecy that prevented panic. The success remained unknown to those it protected, exactly as planned. Emperor Vaxon activated his flagship's weapon systems as the battle reached its critical phase. The vessel represented the pinnacle of Krellian engineering, equipped with experimental energy projectors and prototype missile arrays never deployed in combat. He bypassed standard firing protocols to unleash maximum power in a single concentrated assault. The action was driven by desperation rather than tactical calculation, an attempt to regain control through sheer destructive force. His command crew worked with frantic efficiency to channel all available energy into the attack sequence. He targeted the Defiance with everything his vessel could muster. The flagship's main battery aligned precisely with the human command ship, its focusing arrays glowing with contained energy. Secondary weapon systems joined the targeting solution, creating overlapping fields of fire that covered all potential evasion vectors. The Emperor personally authorized the release of restricted munitions normally reserved for planetary bombardment. This represented the Empire's ultimate expression of military power, directed against a single target for the first time in centuries. The attack was absorbed by human shielding technology, without visible effect. Energy beams struck the Defiance's defensive barrier and dispersed across its surface like water hitting glass. The shield displayed no stress indicators, no energy fluctuations, no sign of overload capacity being approached. Monitoring systems showed perfect dissipation of the immense energy output, without transfer to the protected vessel. The flagship's weapons had achieved zero penetration against technology that operated on different physical principles. Admiral Cross gave the order for a single decisive counterstrike from the Defiance's command center. His instructions specified minimal necessary force to eliminate the immediate threat. Targeting officers selected a precision energy beam configuration designed for surgical strikes against critical systems. The weapon charged instantly without the power buildup characteristic of Krellian technology. Cross confirmed the firing solution with calm assurance, his decision based on tactical necessity rather than emotional response. A precision energy beam vaporized the Emperor's bridge instantly. The attack bypassed all defensive systems through frequency modulation that matched shield harmonics. The beam maintained perfect cohesion across the distance between vessels, not dispersing or weakening during transit. It struck the viewport area with microscopic accuracy. Its energy focused on a precise volume rather than general area. The effect was immediate and complete within the targeted space. Vaxon and his inner circle were eliminated in one shot. The beam's energy converted all matter within the bridge compartment to elementary particles. No explosive decompression occurred because the containment field maintained structural integrity during the process. Adjacent sections of the flagship remained completely undamaged, with no secondary explosions or system failures. The strike demonstrated capability to destroy precisely what was targeted, while preserving everything else. The symbol of Krellian power vanished from the battlefield. The flagship continued drifting with its systems operational, but its command structure erased. Its presence had served as coordination point and morale anchor for the entire Imperial fleet. The sudden silence from the vessel created immediate confusion across all remaining ships. Its undisturbed exterior concealed the complete removal of leadership that had governed for generations. Remaining Krellian forces lost all coordination and command structure. Ships that had been responding to centralized orders now operated without direction, communication channels filled with conflicting reports and unconfirmed information. The hierarchical system that required top-down decision-making collapsed without its apex. Vessels attempted to maintain formation, but without coordinated purpose or strategic objective. Ships either surrendered or fled in disorganized retreat. Many captains chose to power down weapons and engines, recognizing the futility of continued resistance. Others attempted to withdraw from the engagement zone, but without coordinated escape vectors. The previously disciplined fleet became a scattered collection of individual vessels making independent survival decisions. Human forces accepted surrenders while allowing retreating ships to depart without pursuit. 3,000 years of imperial rule ended in minutes. The political structure that had dominated 47 systems dissolved with the Emperor's death. The military apparatus lost its central authority and unifying purpose. Billions of beings across conquered worlds remained unaware that their oppressor's power had been broken. The defeat represented not just military loss but complete systemic collapse of an empire that had seemed eternal. Human forces began securing 47 newly freed worlds following the Empire's collapse. Security teams established perimeter defenses around population centers while conducting systematic sweeps for remaining Imperial loyalists. They encountered minimal resistance from former overseers who recognized the futility of continued opposition. The initial phase focused on stabilizing essential services and preventing civil disorder during the transition period. Patrols maintained visible presence without employing aggressive tactics, their approach emphasizing protection over control. Temporary governments formed from local resistance movements that had operated in secrecy for generations. These groups possessed intimate knowledge of their population's needs and existing social structures. Human advisors provided organizational frameworks while insisting on local leadership selection. The transition councils represented diverse ethnic groups, professional backgrounds, and regional interests that had been suppressed under imperial rule. Their first actions involved establishing basic legal protections and communication networks. Relief teams delivered food, medicine, and infrastructure support to populations experiencing sudden systemic change. Supply ships transported agricultural products from human worlds to address immediate nutritional needs. Medical units established clinics to treat chronic conditions neglected under imperial control. Engineering Corps repaired power grids, water systems, and transportation networks that had deteriorated during centuries of exploitation. The assistance focused on enabling self-sufficiency rather than creating dependency. Education programs started teaching self-governance principles to populations unfamiliar with democratic processes. Curriculum modules covered historical examples of successful transitions from oppression to self-rule. Instruction emphasized practical skills like conflict resolution, resource management, and representative governance. The programs operated through local facilitators who adapted content to cultural contexts while maintaining core principles. Educational centers became hubs for community organization and planning. Engineering teams helped rebuild damaged systems and infrastructure with sustainable technology. They introduced energy solutions that reduced dependence on external resources. Construction projects employed local labor and materials to stimulate economic activity. Technical training programs transferred maintenance skills to ensure long-term operational capability. The approach prioritized resilience and adaptability over temporary fixes. The transition from slavery to freedom required careful management of psychological and social dimensions. Councils implemented gradual changes to prevent system shock among populations unused to self-determination. Support networks addressed trauma resulting from generations of oppression. The process acknowledged that political freedom alone couldn't immediately erase ingrained patterns of thought and behavior. Specialists monitored community readiness for increased autonomy. Captain Reynolds noted the easy part was over. Now came the real work of building sustainable societies. He observed that military victory created opportunity rather than solution. His teams focused on creating conditions where organic development could occur without external direction. The approach recognized that lasting change must come from within, rather than being imposed from outside. Humanity committed to sustainable support, rather than conquest or control. Assistance packages included sunset clauses that gradually reduced external involvement. Advisory roles emphasized knowledge transfer over decision-making. Resource allocations shifted from direct provision to capacity building. The commitment reflected understanding that true liberation required eventual independence from liberators. Liberated populations would determine their own leaders and destinies through established processes. Human observers monitored elections to ensure fairness without influencing outcomes. Constitutional conventions developed governance models suited to local values and circumstances. The approach respected cultural differences while maintaining core rights protections. External involvement decreased as local institutions gained competence and confidence. The process would require generations to complete fully. Initial stability would give way to long-term development challenges. Social structures needed time to adapt to new realities and possibilities. Economic systems required rebuilding from exploitative models to sustainable patterns. Cultural evolution would continue long after political frameworks stabilized. The timeline acknowledged that meaningful change operates on scales beyond immediate measurement. News of the Krellian defeat traveled through previously silent regions of the galaxy. The information spread via encrypted trade routes, scout ship observations, and intercepted communications. Species that had maintained strict isolation for security reasons now monitored developments with renewed interest. The scale of the Empire's collapse attracted attention far beyond the immediate conflict zone, reaching civilizations that had avoided galactic politics for generations. This dissemination occurred without human involvement, demonstrating how thoroughly the balance of power had shifted. Other galactic powers observed humanity's actions with carefully measured reactions. Surveillance networks recorded the entire engagement from multiple angles and distances. Analysis teams studied the tactical patterns, technological capabilities, and strategic decisions displayed during the conflict. Governments convened emergency sessions to assess the implications for their own security and interests. The responses ranged from cautious approval to active concern, depending on each power's relationship with the former empire and assessment of human intentions. Some species expressed open gratitude for removing a predatory empire from their borders. These were typically smaller civilizations that had suffered raids or extortion under Krellian rule. Their communications contained relief at no longer facing constant threat of invasion or domination. Several governments transmitted formal acknowledgments recognizing the human intervention as beneficial to regional stability. These messages often included offers of diplomatic contact and potential cooperation against remaining imperial loyalists. Others feared what humanity might do with its demonstrated power and willingness to intervene. Larger powers that maintained their own empires watched the precedent with concern about potential application to their territories. Military analysts noted the efficiency of human operations and the scale of force projection achieved. Political leaders debated whether human principles would respect existing power structures or seek to reshape them according to external standards. This concern motivated increased military preparedness among several regional powers. The political landscape shifted from empire-dominated to multipolar almost overnight. The vacuum created by the Krellian collapse allowed previously suppressed interest to emerge. Minor powers began exercising influence beyond their previous limitations. Trading blocs formed around new economic opportunities rather than security concerns. The redistribution of power created both instability and opportunity across dozens of systems, with human presence serving as both stabilizing influence and potential disruption. Trade routes reopened between systems that had been isolated for centuries under imperial control. Merchant vessels began traveling corridors that had been prohibited zones for generations. New markets emerged for goods and services that imperial restrictions had previously limited. Economic activity increased as transportation became safer and more predictable without imperial patrols demanding tariffs or restricting movement. This commercial expansion created wealth distribution that helped stabilize transitioning societies. New alliances formed based on mutual interest rather than coercion or domination. Governments sought partnerships that offered complementary capabilities without requiring submission. Defense agreements emphasized collective security rather than hierarchical command structures. Economic partnerships focused on balanced exchange rather than exploitation of weaker parties. These arrangements represented a fundamental shift in how power was organized and exercised across the region. Humanity established itself as a major force through action rather than claim or declaration. Its influence grew from demonstrated capability rather than asserted authority. Other powers recognized human technology, strategy, and operational effectiveness as factors requiring consideration in their planning. This position was earned through concrete achievement rather than traditional power projection or territorial expansion. The approach created a different model of influence that didn't rely on control of subject populations. The galaxy contemplated what principles might guide this new power and its future actions. Analysis focused on human decision-making during the conflict, particularly the emphasis on protection of life and rejection of slavery. Observers noted the consistent application of ethical considerations alongside military effectiveness. This prompted examination of whether human values would remain consistent or adapt to changing circumstances. The question of what humans considered non-negotiable became a primary subject of diplomatic analysis. A question echoed across systems as governments assessed the new reality. What else might humans achieve when pressed by necessity or principle? The demonstrated capability to defeat a superior force through technology and strategy suggested untapped potential for future actions. The willingness to risk everything for ethical imperatives indicated possible responses to other galactic problems. This uncertainty created both hope and apprehension about what humanity might choose to do next with its demonstrated capacities. The Defiance crew became symbolic of an entirely new galactic paradigm through their demonstrated actions. Their conduct established precedents that other species began studying and evaluating against their own cultural frameworks. The vessel's personnel operated with a combination of tactical precision and ethical consideration that hadn't been witnessed in previous interstellar conflicts. Their approach represented a departure from established norms of engagement and occupation. Their actions demonstrated courage combined with operational restraint under extreme circumstances. They engaged superior forces without hesitation, yet consistently chose the least destructive methods to achieve objectives. This balance between determination and control became a subject of intense analysis across multiple military academies. The pattern showed that aggressive action didn't require excessive force or unnecessary casualties to be effective. They systematically destroyed weapons and combat systems while preserving lives and infrastructure. Their targeting prioritized disabling capabilities over eliminating personnel, even when facing opponents who showed no similar restraint. This selective approach required additional effort and risk compared to standard demolition protocols. The consistent preservation of life across all engagements became a defining characteristic of their operations. Their technology consistently served protective functions rather than conquest applications. Shield systems demonstrated unprecedented defensive capabilities without corresponding offensive enhancements. Their weapons focused on precision disablement rather than maximum destruction. Even their propulsion systems emphasized maneuverability and evasion over aggressive positioning. The technological philosophy appeared oriented toward survival and protection rather than domination. Other species began intensive study of human principles and historical development patterns. Research teams analyzed Earth's political evolution, conflict resolution methods, and ethical frameworks. The focus particularly examined how humanity had addressed its own periods of internal oppression and systemic injustice. These studies revealed patterns of gradual moral development that sometimes included regression before advancement. The concept of fundamental rights for all beings gained significant traction across multiple systems. Previously isolated civilizations began discussing universal protections that transcended species differences. The practical demonstration that such principles could be successfully implemented at scale provided concrete examples for consideration. This led to renewed interest in interstellar conventions that had been largely ignored under imperial domination. Humanity's willingness to bear heavy costs for unknown others earned genuine respect across diplomatic circles. The calculated risk of engaging a superior force for ethical reasons demonstrated commitment beyond rhetorical positions. This practical sacrifice provided credibility to human statements about values and principles. Other governments recognized that human actions consistently aligned with their professed beliefs. Their emergence effectively redefined the galactic understanding of power and its application. Traditional measures based on fleet size, territorial control, or destructive capacity became inadequate assessment criteria. The conflict demonstrated that effectiveness could derive from precision, intelligence, and ethical consistency rather than pure force projection. This shifted strategic calculations across multiple military organizations. Strength became increasingly measured by protection offered rather than destruction caused. Alliances began evaluating potential partners based on their ability to provide security without imposing control. Military assessments started including capacity for defensive operations and civilian protection in their calculations. This redefinition influenced everything from arms development to diplomatic negotiations. The galaxy learned through concrete example that true power could serve life rather than dominate it. The successful intervention demonstrated that protection and preservation could achieve strategic objectives that pure aggression could not. This realization began influencing political philosophies beyond immediate military considerations. The evidence suggested that sustainable power might actually require fundamentally different approaches than those that had dominated interstellar relations for millennia. Across the liberated systems, one question grew louder than all others. It came from former slaves, regional governors, and even distant observers who had watched the conflict unfold. They all asked the same thing, often in hushed tones around communication arrays or in newly formed council chambers. The question cut to the heart of humanity's actions, seeking to understand the motivation behind such unprecedented intervention. This inquiry persisted precisely because the answer wasn't immediately obvious from external observation. What prompted humanity to risk everything for beings they had never encountered before? The strategic disadvantages were clear to any military analyst. The logistical challenges seemed insurmountable on paper. The potential consequences included total annihilation of their expeditionary force and possible retaliation against their homeworld. No conventional calculation could justify such action based on pure self-interest or expansionist ambition. The decision appeared to defy logical explanation when viewed through standard political or military frameworks. The answer lay buried in human historical records rather than contemporary galactic politics. Earth's development included multiple periods of systemic oppression and brutal domination. Their species had experienced slavery, genocide, and institutional cruelty on planetary scales before achieving their current civilization. These experiences weren't abstract historical footnotes but living memories preserved through education and cultural reflection. The lessons from those periods remained active considerations in their ethical frameworks. Humanity remembered its own long struggle against various forms of tyranny and oppression. Their historical archives contain detailed accounts of resistance movements, abolitionist campaigns, and liberation struggles. These narratives weren't treated as ancient history, but as continuing reference points for current decision-making. The memory of being both oppressor and oppressed in different eras created a unique perspective on power dynamics. This historical awareness provided context for recognizing similar patterns in other species. Their operating principle was fundamentally simple yet absolute in its application. The concept that no being should belong to another formed a non-negotiable foundation of their ethical system. This wasn't merely political philosophy, but something deeper in their cultural DNA. They had fought too many wars and sacrificed too many lives to ever tolerate such systems elsewhere. The principle represented hard-won knowledge rather than idealistic theory. This core conviction consistently outweighed all practical calculations of risk and material cost. Their decision-making process elevated ethical imperatives above conventional strategic considerations. The potential loss of ships' resources and even lives became secondary to upholding fundamental principles. This approach confused other species who prioritized survival and advantage above abstract values. The human willingness to accept massive casualties for moral reasons represented a completely different value hierarchy. The action wasn't motivated by territorial expansion or resource acquisition. Human forces didn't claim any liberated systems for their own use. They didn't establish occupation governments or demand tribute from freed populations. Their assistance came without conditions or expectations of repayment. This absence of self-interest made their intervention more puzzling to observers accustomed to imperial power dynamics. The purity of their motivation became its own form of psychological warfare. It was about applying a consistent moral framework across species lines without exception. Humans refused to create ethical distinctions based on biology or origin. Their principles applied equally to all conscious beings regardless of physical form or cultural background. This universal application surprised many who expected species loyalty to override broader considerations. The consistency demonstrated that their values weren't situational or negotiable based on convenience. Humanity proved through action that principles could hold more power than weapons or technology. Their victory came not from superior force alone, but from the moral authority that guided its application. This demonstration challenged centuries of galactic political theory that prioritized practical power over ethical considerations. The outcome suggested that conviction could overcome numerical and tactical disadvantages in unexpected ways. The galaxy now wondered what other principles humans might defend with similar determination. Observers began studying human history and cultural development for clues about their potential future actions. This analysis tried to predict where they might intervene next and what triggers would prompt response. The uncertainty created both hope and concern across different regions and governments. The question of human consistency became a major factor in galactic political calculations. Liberated worlds formed a new cooperative alliance through a series of constitutional conventions. Representatives from 47 systems established a framework for mutual governance without centralized authority. The alliance operated through rotating councils rather than permanent leadership positions. Each member maintained full autonomy while committing to collective security and economic cooperation. The structure prevented any single species or world from dominating the others through built-in checks and balances. The system operated on principles of mutual defense and shared prosperity. Member worlds contributed to a common defense fleet that answered to joint command rather than individual governments. Trade agreements eliminated tariffs and restrictions that had limited economic growth under imperial rule. Resource distribution systems ensured all members received necessary materials, regardless of their individual wealth or production capacity. The approach recognized that security and economic stability were interconnected across all systems. Humanity offered technical support and strategic advice but refused any leadership position within the new alliance. Their advisory teams provided expertise in governance systems, defense coordination, and economic development without directing policy. They consistently deferred to local decision-making processes, even when their experience suggested alternative approaches might be more effective. This restraint demonstrated commitment to self-determination rather than control or influence acquisition. Each species would find its own path to self-determination through experimentation and adaptation. Some worlds adopted representative democracy, while others developed consensus-based governance models. Economic systems ranged from regulated capitalism to resource-based allocation depending on cultural preferences and historical experiences. The diversity of approaches created a living laboratory of political and social organization that allowed cross-pollination of successful ideas. Trade networks expanded beyond previous imperial boundaries that had restricted commerce for security reasons. New shipping routes connected systems that had been isolated from each other for centuries. Merchant vessels now traveled between formerly separate economic zones without inspection or taxation barriers. This expansion created markets for unique goods and services that had previously remained local specialties. The increased economic activity accelerated recovery and development across all member worlds. Cultural exchange programs flourished between systems that had been isolated by imperial design. Educational institutions established student transfer agreements and joint research initiatives. Artistic collaborations produced new forms of expression, combining different species' aesthetic traditions. Culinary exchanges introduced previously unknown food sources and preparation techniques. These interactions built understanding and appreciation across biological and cultural differences. The memory of Krellian rule became a historical lesson rather than an ongoing threat. Educational programs documented the empire's rise and fall as a case study in power corruption. Memorials honored victims while emphasizing the importance of vigilance against concentrated authority. The experience served as a permanent reference point for evaluating political proposals and governance models. This transformation from trauma to lesson represented significant psychological progress for formerly oppressed populations. New, governments built systems specifically designed to prevent concentrated power abuse. Constitutional frameworks included term limits, power separation, and transparent decision-making requirements. Oversight bodies maintained authority to investigate and correct governmental overreach. Regular audits ensured compliance with established protocols and principles. These mechanisms created structural resistance against the patterns that had enabled imperial control. The galaxy entered an era of unprecedented cooperation and sustainable growth. Collaborative scientific projects addressed common challenges like resource management, and environmental protection. Joint exploration initiatives mapped previously unknown regions beyond former imperial space. Economic development proceeded without the exploitation that had characterized previous expansion. This period represented the first true peace many species had experienced in their recorded history. Humanity's intervention created possibilities that hadn't existed under imperial domination. The removal of systematic oppression allowed natural development and innovation to proceed without artificial constraints. Species that had been limited to labor roles discovered talents in science, art, and governance. Resources previously dedicated to maintaining control became available for improvement and advancement. The action generated opportunities that extended far beyond the immediate military victory, enabling futures that imperial rule had made unimaginable. Earth Command conducted a comprehensive review of the operation's strategic consequences. Analysts examined every aspect from initial engagement to final liberation across 47 systems. Their assessment covered military outcomes, political impacts, and long-term stability projections. The data showed significant fleet losses, but unprecedented strategic gains that redefined human positioning in galactic affairs. Command staff processed these results with careful consideration of future implications. Humanity had risked potential extinction to free beings they'd never before encountered. The decision involved committing their entire mobile fleet against superior forces in unknown territory. Intelligence indicated possible additional threats beyond imperial space that could have exploited their vulnerability. Home system defenses remained minimal during the operation, creating windows of extreme risk. This level of strategic exposure represented the largest gamble in human military history. The choice defied all conventional military and political wisdom across known space. Standard doctrine prioritized home system protection above all other considerations. Established strategic models showed intervention carried unacceptable risk-to-reward ratios. Political advisors warned of potential backlash from other powers who might perceive expansionist motives. Every traditional calculation argued against action despite the ethical imperative. Yet the operation created a more stable and prosperous galactic community than previously existed. Trade networks expanded across formerly isolated regions without imperial restrictions. Economic activity increased as resources shifted from military control to civilian development. Political stability improved through representative governance replacing authoritarian rule. The changes produced measurable improvements in living standards across multiple systems. Humanity learned through direct experience that principles often yield better outcomes than pure calculation. The strategic success came from ethical consistency rather than conventional advantage. Their moral position created alliances and cooperation that pure military power could not achieve. This demonstrated that values could produce practical benefits beyond their intrinsic worth. The lesson would influence future decision-making across human governance. The action established a permanent precedent for intervention against systematic oppression. It demonstrated that humanity would not tolerate slavery or similar institutions regardless of location or species. This set clear boundaries for acceptable behavior by other powers. The precedent included defined criteria for what constituted unacceptable practices requiring response. These parameters provided clarity to the galactic community about human red lines. Other powers now understood humanity would act against systematic injustice without hesitation. This knowledge changed how governments approached their own internal policies and external relations. Species that might have considered oppressive measures now weighed potential human response. The demonstration of capability and willingness created new constraints on behavior across multiple systems. This awareness influenced political calculations beyond immediate human influence. This knowledge created effective deterrence against similar predatory systems developing elsewhere. Potential aggressors recognized that human intervention could eliminate their power, regardless of scale or preparation. The demonstrated capability to neutralize doomsday weapons removed ultimate deterrent options. The consistent ethical framework made human actions predictable, despite their military unpredictability. This combination prevented many conflicts from ever starting. The galaxy became objectively safer because humanity chose to accept danger for itself. The removal of a predatory empire reduced immediate threats to numerous species. The establishment of cooperative alliances created stability through mutual support. The demonstration of ethical intervention discouraged similar oppressive systems from forming. These changes produced net security improvements across inhabited space. The entire calculation of risk had been fundamentally transformed by the operation's outcome. Traditional models based on force ratios and resource advantages required complete reconsideration. Strategic planning now had to account for ethical factors and principles as operational elements. The demonstrated effectiveness of values-based decision-making changed risk assessment parameters. This shift represented perhaps the most significant legacy of the entire conflict, altering how civilizations would evaluate dangerous choices for generations to come. Humanity's emergence reshaped the galaxy by combining advanced technology with principled action. They risked their own survival to free those they'd never met. Now 47 systems form new alliances built on cooperation, not control. The story continues across countless worlds, finally writing their own futures without fear. Each civilization now chooses its path forward. The Krellian Empire's fall taught a crucial lesson empires often forget. Power need not mean domination. True strength shows itself in protection, in restraint, in the courage to defend others. That is the legacy left in the stars.